You are joining us live, Faisal Hassan, NDB Live, a virtual conversation on childcare with our community, local community members. Tonight, I have a distinguished guest, members of our community. First, I have Paula Dinota, residence concerned parent on cost of inflation of childcare due to the pandemic. Also, I have Caroline Fens. Caroline worked for over 10 years at the Childcare Resource and Research Unit, where she co-authored the Early Childhood Education and Care in Canada series. Caroline has a bachelor's degree in early childhood education and master's degree in early childhood studies. She is the Public Policy and Government Relations Coordinator for Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare, as well as a member of the Board of Directors for both Childcare Now of Canada and the Childcare Resource Research Unit. Welcome, both of you. We're also expecting another guest to join us shortly, Grace Ferreira. Before I begin and introduce my guest to speak, I also wish to acknowledge at this time the land that we now know as York Southwestern is a traditional territory of many nations, including Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Again, I wish you welcome. And I'll start with Paula.
Yes. Hello, my name is Paula Dinota, and I'm a resident here in the York Southwestern area. I have a 2-year-old son who attends the Learning Enrichment Foundation Center at Immaculate Conception. And myself, I have a PhD in neuroscience, so meaning I've been in university longer than anyone should ever be in their entire life. But at the same time, I've spent many years investing in my education and in my career that now as a researcher, I work at the University of Toronto at the Mississauga campus in the psychology department. And I actually study how stress influences performance and perception in the brain among police officers, actually. So that might be for another conversation that we can have another time. But as a result, I've been very dependent on affordable childcare as someone that's been in higher degrees and higher education for many years. So this is a very important conversation that we're having, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Paula. And now I turn to Caroline Fens. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I think this is a really timely conversation given what's happening around childcare here in Ontario, and hoping to discuss some of the work that we put into, surveys of the childcare sector and our report on reopening to recovery, and what we really have an opportunity to still achieve here in Ontario if we can turn things around.
Sorry, I was muted. The childcare conversation is important in our community. And tonight we want you to also participate. Your comments, your questions, you can, if you are joining us live, Faisal Hassan NDP there, we will try our best to include your comments. If you are directing me or my guest, you're most welcome. If it's just a comment, we will also try to share with the rest of the audience. Ontario has the highest childcare costs in the nation ever. Prior to the pandemic, working parents, and especially women, will find it difficult or impossible to return to work without childcare options. The Ford government's failure to support childcare operators in safely reopening means centers will be forced to raise their fees. The government has not allocated any resources to ensure the safety of early childhood educators with personal protective equipment and other issues. So Caroline, you have been expert in this, perhaps you have been doing a lot of research on these issues. what do you think, how can we tackle once and for all the crisis of childcare so that we can help our families, especially parents, especially mothers?
Yeah, that's a great question and a very timely one. I think that in many ways, the crisis that we're experiencing in childcare now, as bad as it is, I think the one thing that we can say is that it's now something that people can see. Because for years, I used to talk about the childcare crisis in Canada as being a silent crisis, because it relied upon parents, often mothers, scrambling, trying to figure out how to find a space, you know, getting on the 12 waiting lists when you're still pregnant, and then trying to figure out how to pay for a space if you're lucky enough to even get one. So it relied on parents kind of scrambling, like working below the surface, trying to figure this stuff out, and how stressful it was. But as a society at large, we didn't acknowledge it as the crisis that it was. But now, because of COVID, I think that it's more obvious to many more people, to employers, for example. I mean, any employer who has a Zoom call with an employee who's got a toddler on their head knows that childcare is now an issue, right? So in that way, I think it's brought the issue to the forefront. And we're seeing many new people who've never spoken out about childcare issues before, talking about it as key to economic and social recovery. The challenge that we have here in Ontario is that the Ford government has largely ignored this issue. And we see that in the reopening. Prior to the announcement that childcare could reopen, our organization and parent groups and the Association of Early Childhood Educators had worked to put out a report on what was needed to reopen safely. And we talked about how childcare centers needed to have adequate time to prepare to reopen. There needed to be a plan to repurpose additional space so that centers could still serve, at least close to the same number of families that they did before, and that there needed to be enough funding to make all of that happen. And these recommendations, we had 27 detailed recommendations for the provincial government on reopening, and it was largely almost wholly ignored. And on June 9th, the province turned around and said that childcare could reopen in 3 days' time, which everybody who had been watching the issue knew was impossible because of the need to put in place new health and safety standards and to do that responsibly. So I think the challenge that we have now is really to raise our voices. I think that parent voices are critical because, if you hear the minister, for example, talking about childcare issues, he's pitching to parents, he's talking about helping parents when we know that parents are suffering, that they're at their end of their wits end trying to make this work. And so we need, to really raise our voices together. And I know this as a working mom myself, how difficult this all has been. So we really need to make sure that we're raising our voices and saying, we actually expect the provincial and federal governments to put their money where their mouth is and make childcare a priority.
Very good. That's excellent. I now invite to Paula to what I know you are a parent. You are also know the issues about childcare, and I know in our community also the last 15 years has been very difficult, and the last 2 years also I call it from bad to worse. But I think what we need is to also listen to parents like yourself. So I know the issues of inflation, of the cost of also of childcare, and sometimes it is either going back to your career or staying home, and it shouldn't be that way. We could do it better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't invest, a decade in university trying to pursue a career in academia with the end goal of becoming a professor, which is a very lofty dream, but it's something that I'm very dedicated to, and teaching at the level of higher education as well. but it's also very financially restricting for anyone that's able to make the sacrifice of, making the salary of a PhD student, which is nothing. Like you're depending on scholarships and paying tuition when, your friends are moving up in other jobs and other industries. There's a sense that you're falling behind, but it's definitely an investment for a future career path. And it's something that I'm very dedicated to and have only been able to pursue, fortunately, because of support from my parents. And that's something that I want to acknowledge in this conversation as well, that this isn't just about parents, it's the grandparents that are now coming in and taking the role of full-time care for a lot of people. And they have their own health issues to be worried about. And on top of the all of the concerns with COVID and keeping them exposed and things, like these are additional stressors that all families have. So it's really not just limited to parents, but also extended family, grandparents, whoever we can reach out to help to alleviate some of the burden, because we are expected to continue working. And, I'm very thankful and very grateful that I've been able to continue working full-time and being paid, and we have stability in that sense, but you're also expected to perform your full-time working duties as well. So where does the 2-year-old go? And, I have a husband who helps, and we're able to balance, and we're fortunate to have both sets of grandparents living also in the York South region. But I know there are many families that aren't so lucky. They don't have extended family. They don't have a social network that can help to pick up some of the childcare duties. And I can't even imagine what they would do in terms of balancing work, and especially if you have to physically go work in a workplace. My sister works in banking. She's had to be in the branch consistently this entire time, whereas I'm lucky enough to be able to work from home. So there's so many different issues within the conversation that we're having, but I'm very glad we're having it.
Very good, very good. For those of you who are joining us now, you are joining us live. Facebook, Faisal Hassan NDB Live. Those of you joining us also Instagram, welcome. We are having today, this evening, a guest, Paula Dinota and Caroline Fern, and we are talking about childcare and the effect of our community and beyond. The Ontario NDP also proposed solutions of how we can fix this. We said that provide to the government, provide new stabilization funding for childcare to cover parent fees for childcare spaces that must remain closed during the phased reopening. Confirm details of the announced support to cover extra operating costs for staff who will have lower ratios, be required to clean and prepare more, monitor health and safety protocols, and increase communication with families. Confirm that this will be new money that will not come from existing funding for childcare providers. Guarantee that no special workers currently receiving emergency childcare will lose childcare provisions when the emergency childcare program ends. Work with federal counterparts to ensure childcare centers are continue to receive Canadian emergency wage subsidy during the phased reopening. Guarantee that parents will be able to access paid job protected leave until school and childcare fully resumes, and consult with the municipalities to find ways to use available public infrastructure so that school and childcare centers can resume in person for as many children as possible in a safe and healthy way. So we have put proposals and ideas to make sure that we are working and proposing. We are not just opposing for the sake of opposing the government, but we have been putting ideas, and that's what we want our government to work for the people and put for the people. And what will you say to, if you have any other ideas that we have not put forward that can help parents and address the issue of childcare, Caroline?
Sure, that's excellent, and I think that those are all important proposals to have put forward. One of the things that that we've been talking about is to try to It feels like since the pandemic hit, we're constantly dealing with a fresh crisis, what's happening. But what we need to be doing is starting to look long term and thinking about recovery, and thinking about how we can address this crisis and come out of it with a stronger childcare system. Because I think that this should be the shock that makes us do that, because it's become so clear that we have a childcare crisis in Canada. So, and also because what's happened with the pandemic means that the way childcare was organized before is not going to fit back together well, for a few reasons. One is that before the pandemic happened, childcare, it didn't actually work well for many families. We know that there was a shortage of spaces. We know that families were paying, high childcare fees, and it was unaffordable. But for centers to remain financially viable, they had to charge high fees. And as you said before, we had the highest childcare fees in the country before the pandemic. And they required having full enrollment, right, to keep the doors open. And they also had to pay early child educators pretty low wages. And that's pretty widely known that our ECEs don't actually make that much money. They're undervalued, underpaid workforce, largely women. But since COVID, we can't rely on any of those things anymore. That's all been thrown out the window. Parents, who are impacted by, the economic recession that we're facing, who may be, facing unstable employment, they can't be expected to continue to pay such high parent fees, let alone absorb the cost of childcare that's actually going to become more expensive, given the health and safety, protocols and things that we need to put in place. And because of health and safety reasons, we actually have to decrease the number of families that we can serve in an age group, and quite dramatically. So say a preschool room used to have 24 children in a group, and now that group is 8 with the same staffing that it had before, right? So, so the cost is so much higher. And early childhood educators, we're talking about a sector that we had a recruitment and retention crisis before. And now to expect those ECEs to go back to work for a very low wage with increased risk and responsibility, that's not going to happen, right? So for all of those reasons, we're saying we need to re-examine childcare. We need to press the reset button and move toward a much more publicly funded and publicly managed system. And so we're not talking about a crisis that's just going to be a few weeks long, or until reopening happens, or just until September. We're talking about something that we have to, as a society, as a province, as a country, we have to get ahead of this and realize that we have a care crisis, and we need, a childcare system to be the core of economic and social recovery. And to do that, we have to move to a more publicly funded and publicly managed system.
Good. Paula?
I agree. And as a parent, I'm very sympathetic to the needs also of the early childhood educators, which include some of my friends and family. These are the jobs that some people are faced to going back to. And just the same as we're concerned with sending our son back for childcare, it's every individual that has to go back to work in a public facing venue. You of course have a personal concern about your own exposure. Am I going to get sick? Am I going to bring COVID now to my family and to my network? So these are all very valid concerns that, as a parent, I'm very respectful of. And it's also been communicated to us as parents from Learning Enrichment Foundation, which has been wonderful. I have absolutely no complaints whatsoever about the quality of care and safety that my son did receive. But they did communicate to us during this closure that the costs would increase 3 to 4 times, which understandably, if you're limiting the number of groups of children, of course, who's going to watch them? You will have to hire more people or have more resources in this rolling back. But what was very worrying is in that same communication saying if the costs will be 3 to 4 times more and there isn't support from the government, then that cost will be passed on to families. And for us, as I mentioned with my career, I went back to work after only 8 months of maternity leave. So putting my son into an infant program, it cost almost $100 a day. We waited for his 16-month birthday or 18-month when he finally went into the toddler room. But it's still about, depending how many days in the month, we love those short months where it's still maybe between $1,200 and $1,300 a month. And I have, again, friends and family that pay more if they have private childcare, or they work downtown and they have to use childcare facilities downtown. It can be thousands and thousands of dollars a month if you don't qualify for the subsidy. And as I mentioned, my husband and I were both fortunate to be able to work, but we don't qualify for the help. So the decision comes down, do I go back to work? Do I sacrifice a career that I've invested decades in pursuing to, stay home and be a full-time mom, which is, again, a wonderful choice for some mothers, but that wasn't what I pursued university for many years. And we just feel a lot of pressure now, and we need help.
Absolutely, you're right, and that's also across the province. My colleagues and I myself also have gotten letters and emails, constituents across the province, saying that their local childcare operators has informed them of a plan to hike parent fees, in some cases up to 4 times the current amount. And that's very difficult. And also early childhood educators, they are, going to school, and now they're working part-time. Sometimes they've been reported that folks who are working at McDonald's are actually getting more than folks who have been educating our youngsters. And that's a shame. I think what we need to do is to make it as a career so that it is able to afford to raise a family in that salary, and it becomes not just precarious, but it's a full-time and permanent basis, so that we provide funding. So what we have is lack of funding is preventing childcare centers from paying their staff and from purchasing materials and equipment to require safety. And you're right, we need to also remove the profit aspect of it, and make it a nonprofit, and make sure that there is a standard there. And when we have professionals and government putting what is important to us, our children, and the future of also our workforce, and this makes sense really to invest that. And has been receiving many calls and emails from residents concerned on how this childcare plan is going to roll out. And I think underfunded and parents face some of the highest charges. I've said that in Canada, with the extra challenges of COVID-19, families are struggling even more. Childcare costs are expected to increase substantially. In some cases, more than $200 a day. And that's a shame. A country like ours, a province like ours, should put our priorities straight. Caroline, I mean, it doesn't make sense. You have to invest human capital. And our young people need to be trained early on, to have early educators who would be able to help them, learn how to read, start up early on. And then the parents at that time, then they can also be productive members of our community, help our economy. And it makes sense by investing childcare, it is investing our communities. Mm-hmm. You know that previous governments have neglected this, but I think we can do better. Mm-hmm. Work together, and if we listen to parents and experts and put childcare front and center. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely, and it's it's in a really important time to do that. I noticed that in the last few days the provincial government has been talking about the economic recovery and investing in infrastructure, and those are all good things to invest in. Highway project, transit projects, those are good things to invest in. But there's there really needs to be a shift that when we're talking about economic recovery, it's not just bricks and mortar infrastructure that needs investment. It's actually social infrastructure and things like childcare. And especially, you know, we know that the pandemic, the economic impact of this recession is different from past recessions because it has impacted women disproportionately.
Yes.
You know, we're talking about this as a she session, right? Or like a recession. And that, you know, there actually needs to be an investment in childcare if we want to have economic recovery for working mothers. So that part of it is important. The economic argument, I think, is very important. But there's another huge issue. We're talking about our young children, and that's about social recovery. And, you know, there was just a study out today from Statistics Canada, which had done a large survey of parents talking about, you know, what they'd been facing, what their concerns were around the pandemic. And what it noted was that 3/4 of parents were experiencing stress or very concerned about combining work and family. And I think about nearly 70% also responded that they were concerned or very concerned about their young children and changes in their behavior, stress, anxiety, and other things that they'd seen during the pandemic. And so, you know, we're talking, I'm sure that Paula can actually speak to this much more than I can. But, you know, I think that, you know, we actually are going to need to have early childhood education and care programs that take that into account and, you know, that are, you know, have trauma informed pedagogy, because, you know, if we want to bring a whole generation of young children to recover from this, what's been a really traumatic event for young children. If you think about, you know, being a 2-year-old and, you know, suddenly not being able to see your friends or your grandparents or give somebody a hug that you wanted to give a hug to, or play on the playground that you used to play on, and not having the words to describe what that means. You know, you and I, we can talk about at least what that feels like, how this has all felt so strange. A young child can't do that. And so we really need early childhood education and care programs that can be responsive to that. But for that to happen, we need to have early childhood educators who are trained in trauma-informed pedagogy. We need to have high quality programs that are taking that into account. So it's not just childcare as somewhere to park the kids, you know, so that parents can get back to work, which I think is what we're hearing a lot about, the economic side of it. But it's really about early childhood education and care that has children at the center of it. And having programs that are high quality that that provide that, you know, for a whole generation of young children who are, you know, who we need to be able to recover from this pandemic.
And it's important, you know, that the safety of children is very also important, not to just rush it, you know, so that their health and their safety comes priority number one. Because for preparedness of childcare centers is concerning as well. And centers need health and safety protocols put in place to address parental concerns so that they can send their children to childcare, knowing every precaution has taken place to ensure the safety of their children and indeed the staff. Early childhood educators also is important that we invest and we provide that also early on. One of the ways we can also make sure that, you know, the early childhood educators can get the practical experience. We can also do work integrated learning where while they are in school, they can also have practical experiences in that, you know, continuing learning and at the same time integrated together. These details are vague or lacking complete at this point is not helping our community and is not helping our parents, because parents are concerned, first, the safety, also they're concerned about the cost associated with, coupled with also in our community, we are paying also higher auto insurance premiums because of where we live. And in some cases, 700, 500, 400, and plus an average of 1,200 to 1,400 for childcare. And how are you going to afford the essentials, you know, the affordability issues? So it's making difficult our community to have a good quality life, and we can do better. So I bring up Paula to this. I know it's important in childcare to listen to the parents. Is the government listening? I know they have not been listening to us as the official opposition. Have they been listening to parents and stakeholders in the province of Ontario?
That's a good question, and to be honest, I don't know. And I think this goes back to the conversation that we actually had, Faisal, before we went live, and about the idea that a lot of parents have concerns and we have complaints, and we can be very critical of, you know, the government and what's being done, what isn't being done. But do we actually, you know, advocate for ourselves? Do we actually become involved in the politics? And aside from this conversation that I'm having right now, I can't say that I myself have been engaged in government. And again, that's out of necessity, out of balancing work and family and childcare, and especially during the pandemic, we're, you know, paying attention to the news. There's not much to do but watch the news in the evening and paying attention to numbers and things. But there isn't a lot of information for parents like myself and just ordinary citizens. What can we do? How can we actually petition to the government to help? So I think how I became involved in this conversation was just clicking a link that was provided through the Childcare Center. And if you're interested in signing a petition, all you have to do is just click here, put your name and your email. And I thought, well, if this is one small thing that I can do, fine. And I've been very surprised to, you know, hear back from your office several times and being invited to this conversation. So I'm really glad that someone is actually listening, that, you know, just clicking that link and putting your name on a list. If you are one of thousands of people that can show, you know, to the government or the powers that be, hey, this is unacceptable or we need help, that's at least something.
Great, thank you. Those of you who are joining us, you're joining us live. Faisal Hassan, NDP, Facebook Live. And I know those of you have been sending comments. I'll just take one question. I think this question will be to the panel. And that is Irmeli D has asked, can we follow the Scandinavian model of daycare, subsidies from the government helping families, average cost $200 a month in these countries? Caroline, has that model exist? Ermela D, he believes, is asking actually, this model exists in Scandinavian countries, $200. And there are also some cases in Quebec, in our own neck of the wood here in Canada. So would you like to speak on that, Caroline?
Sure, absolutely. And yeah, the Scandinavian model has been, you know, looked at for, you know, as a leader in early childhood education and care for many years. What's interesting is that, you know, over the years, actually, while, you know, places like Sweden and Denmark, they started their childcare systems, you know, in the 1970s, and they built them up over time to universal enrollment and affordability for everybody. You know, those were the sort of the leaders for many years. But what's happened is that actually many more countries have now moved forward and have, you know, similar, you know, much more accessibility, affordability than we have in Canada. And I think it actually shocks a lot of Canadians to learn that Canada is so low on those like sort of international league tables. We're like right at the bottom in terms of the funding that we put into childcare and, you know, the affordability for parents, accessibility. And so Canada actually is really an international laggard outside of the province of Quebec, where they moved ahead in the 1990s to develop, you know, and invest in childcare and to have a more affordable model. For many years, it was a $7 a day childcare model. Now they have a sliding scale, but it's still much more affordable than it is here. And they have much more public childcare than we have here. They do have a mix of, you know, profit and nonprofit as well. But they have, as a sort of cornerstone, they have the publicly delivered Centre de Petite Enfance. And what we saw in the pandemic is really interesting, which is that in Quebec, because they had this childcare system, when everybody was shutting down childcare, Quebec was actually able to pivot much more quickly and open emergency childcare centers for essential service workers. While our centers remain closed, even to, nurses, doctors, people who we needed to be able to get to work. And Quebec, because they had that system in place, were able to open those programs much more quickly for essential service workers. So that's one of the things that I think we need to think about in this, which is that we need to build a system that's robust and that's nimble, because if we face a second wave, if we have to close down childcare again, we can't have the chaos that we had, before. I think that, parents, everybody sort of realized this is an unprecedented crisis. We're doing our best. We're going to get through this. And the months rolled by while parents tried to piece this together. And I think the frustration that we're hearing now from families is because there was an understanding, almost a trust, that we're going to do our best. We're going to try to do our full-time jobs. We're going to try to be full-time parents at the same time, because this is an unprecedented crisis, and a hope and a trust that government was working on something, and was going to come up with something better, right? So that we could come out of this with a childcare system that was better. And I think that just in the past week, when the Ontario government started talking about the different options around back to school, and that maybe it might only be 2 days a week and things like that, suddenly parents were like, wait a second, there have been months have gone by now. We assumed that somebody was working on something here to finally address this crisis, because we can't keep it together any longer, right? We need education, we need school, and we need childcare. So I think that we do need to look at those models internationally where it's been working well, and understand that the public funding that those countries put into childcare is actually an investment, that public spending on childcare is some of the best money that governments can spend, because it comes back in terms of tax revenue from increased workforce participation of mothers. Quebec's shown that. The economic research and evidence is there. So there's no reason for governments not to move ahead with a universal model, as happens in Scandinavia and other parts of the country and in Quebec. And it's past time that happens here in Ontario.
I welcome that, and I think that's the right thing to do, and it's the right investment to make a country like ours. I'll bring to Paula to comment on the Irmeli D.
That's actually my mom. My mom asked that question.
Oh, very good.
So it makes me laugh, but you can read the question again.
Oh, yes. It says that, can we follow the Scandinavian model of daycare subsidies from the government helping families? Average cost $200 a month in these countries. Yes.
So my mother, the proud Finn that she is, she's from Finland. And so, I have cousins. I actually have a cousin that we both gave birth to a son on the same day. So my son has a little twin cousin in Finland, and it's very interesting to kind of, compare in a way their progression, and they're both flourishing and doing very well. But the big comparison is when I went back to work and was telling my cousins how much we pay for childcare a month. They're baffled. They're completely baffled, because again, that's my mother, Irmeli D, commented in the question. They pay somewhere on average, 100 euros a month, so maybe $200 Canadian just for some registration fees, or for basic things. But there's the restriction of the cost is already so high pressure. And then to mirror some of what Carolyn was saying as well, in the consideration of putting children back with the risk of a pandemic that is still around, we've actually decided to withdraw our son from daycare. And it's only because of step-in caregivers like my mother and other grandparents that we're fortunate enough to actually be able to make that work, but just barely, and by asking a lot of our parents, who should be enjoying their retirement and who should also be protecting themselves from exposure during a critical time like this. So it's absolutely concerning, again, not just from the financial, economic point of view, but also from the health and safety aspect.
Very good. I'll just also take another comment and bit of question from our audiences who are joining us live from Facebook, Faisal Hassan, NGB Live. Sarah Benedetta writes to us, with more than one child's almost impossible to have enough money to save for our children's education or future because childcare is so expensive. Where are my tax dollars really doing for my family? And I who have paid taxes for decades in this country. And that's a very good question. Thank you to Sarah, because the government has to focus on priority. And I think what you have seen with your taxpayers' money, Sarah, is that we had the past 15 years and the last 2 years at the moment, governments that have a different priorities. And we need a government that puts your priority, childcare, and investment in the future, and also investment that public investment that actually have a return, as Karen has said, for future tax revenue. And it's very important. I would, who wants to take that? And one of you can do.
I think that's a great question. You know, it's a huge financial burden for families. One of the things with, and as you said, if you're trying to save, you know, for your child's future education, you know, one of the things that makes childcare so challenging is that it's a huge cost that comes to parents at a time when it's really difficult for them to afford, because there's so many costs associated with starting a family. And, you know, I know from having seen, you know, all of my friends when they started having children, childcare wasn't something that they were expecting to be such an enormous cost. And, you know, and they would turn to me and they'd be saying, oh, now I understand what it is you've been working on. You know, I didn't know that this was going to be so bad. So it's a huge cost for families when they're, you know, it's difficult for them to afford it. It actually childcare costs are more than university tuition in many cases. And the part about taxpayers' money, I think is important, because one of the things that I think we need to think about is that childcare, yes, childcare needs you know, additional funding, but it also needs public money to be spent well, and that's something, and to be spent efficiently, and that's something that I don't think we do very well. If you look at say the provincial government, you know, last year came out with a tax credit for families, that supposedly for childcare, but that's not a particularly good way to actually spend public money on childcare, because it doesn't do anything to lower parent fees. In fact, if you give, you know, we've seen from other countries that tried this kind of approach, if you just give loose money out and say, oh, this is for childcare, there's nothing to stop a childcare center from raising their fees to match. So that's just throwing good money after bad, right? If the government, as they're doing now, is saying, well, we need to help bail out some of these centers that you know, that might close, you know, that's a short-term measure, but it doesn't actually get us anywhere closer to having a system that can withstand this kind of crisis, or that can be stable, and that can offer, you know, affordable childcare for parents. So one of the things that I think we need to do is to spend taxpayers' money better when it comes to childcare. And that means ensuring that every investment we make is actually building a childcare system that we can rely on, and that future generations can rely on. You know, I see it very similarly to the way education was, say, in the 19th century, where we had, you know, churches or charities, or maybe private, you know, individuals running education services. You know, we had little schoolhouses all across the province. We need to move, what we needed to do was to move to an education system. And the same thing is true for childcare. We need it to be a system, and one that works. You know, we don't talk about, oh, will there, well, maybe now we do, with, you know, with that part-time school might be a thing, but we didn't used to say, oh, I don't know if my child will have a space in grade 5. right? The way we do about preschool. And it's the exact same thing. We need to ensure that there are spaces for every child that needs one, every family that needs one, and that's how we should be looking at childcare.
Paula?
Yeah, I don't really have an answer to that question, but I'm 100% behind it, and mirror Sarah's concern that as someone that's, I've paid taxes and have worked a part-time job since I was 16 years old, and have been investing in my future, my career, my education, pursuing a PhD, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to do so because of the support of my parents and family. But now to be faced possibly with, do I, give up on my career or take a significant pause in order to make up for the childcare that I can't afford, even as a full-time worker with a dual income with my husband. As you said, that there are a lot of other things to pay for, insurance and mortgages and rent and other things that the cost of childcare is so incredibly restrictive already as it is. And the thought of it being increased 2 to 3 times more and passed on to me is actually impossible. So I really feel for other families that don't have a social support network of grandparents and people that they can rely on, and are forced to provide for themselves, either as single parents as well. And especially if they're in industries where they have to physically attend a workplace, you're concerned not only financially, but about your own health and safety as well. So these are extremely important questions.
I guess we will take some of the comments. Those of you who are joining us live from Faisal Hassan, NDP, I'll just take some of the comments. The federal government has demonstrated the willingness to spend money to get to society through this pandemic. It is now time to have all the 3 parties to look into how and who need to pay more tax to build the just society. And it also continues, respond to another wealthy country like Canada should have enough money to pay childcare education and all the way to universities. Again, I'm comparing to European model, and that is Ermeli D. So that is your mother. And I think Sarah Benedetta agrees with that, says, yes, I agree, the money is not spent well. So basically, again, says, I think that grandparents should get compensation if they're caring for our future children, or they're carrying our future. And definitely it's important that the government puts its priorities straight, and that investment for the future is important. And investing, as you said, Caroline, public investment that will return a future revenue for the government. And also, it's also human capital that we invest. If Quebec is doing so good, can we not do better? I mean, this is a simple, but I think that's why we need to have a government that has at heart the interests of the people, that puts and once and for all deals with the issue of childcare. I'm calling on the government to ensure that childcare centers are open with families not expected to pay excessive fees, and that the well-being of children and the struggle of the marginalized families face are at the forefront of any plan. And we need a non-profit, affordable, publicly funded childcare. And that, I think, and to do that also, we need to work with parents like yourself. And those of you who are joining us through a live Facebook, if you have any questions and comments, we'll do our best to select those comments and questions to put to our guest, or even answer from you if that's a direct question you want us to address to that. So now I know that there is a high time that we solve this, and because it has gone for too long, that now families are now basically, it's either a career or, staying home. and this shouldn't be that way, and we can do better. And I think you're right, Paula, you said that how do we organize? Definitely is the way to do it, is getting involved. Getting involved, then that's when the government will listen to you. Your representatives writing to them, folks, is important. Raising your voice loud and clear, addressing them, writing, even knocking their doors, making appointments in their offices, showing up and saying, this is wrong. We can do better, and we should. And I think that's why when people, large members of people speak up, especially mothers, parents, and this COVID-19 affects proportionately, it impacts women. And that's why it's very important that we listen women in order to address this. So I know we are coming closely to the end of the program, but we still have time, a couple of minutes too. So what do you see? I mean, if we are going to compare, for instance, our audiences have mentioned about this Scandinavian model, which I hear most of the time they're doing so well. Why are they doing so well? And some of them, their countries are smaller than Ontario, and population-wise even smaller than us. And why are they doing so well and so better? And how come we cannot do that in Ontario? Yes, Paula?
Yeah, I might have an answer to that, and it mirrors what Carolyn had mentioned before, is how is the money spent? How is public money allocated? And how are you investing in the careers of the people that we depend on for these services that are really essential services? Like teachers and childcare providers, I would say, if it's not obvious by now, they absolutely are essential to the economy, to everything, to allowing other parents to return back to work. So I think investment in early childhood education programs and training programs, and as Carolyn said too, the trauma-focused pedagogy. So how can these caregivers be prepared to handle children that are potentially traumatized by the isolation of the current pandemic, and unfortunately families that might be handling this stressful time very badly with parents maybe that don't get along or that are facing their own anxieties, and that's being picked up on by our children. We know that they pick up everything that we say and do, and even our emotions without speaking, they can really pick up on that. So I think it's absolutely important that however we do decide to go back, that it can't just be a band-aid solution and throwing money, here's a check for everybody, and people are getting more money than they should be. And like, that's a completely inefficient way of spending the money, in my opinion. I think a lot of parents probably feel the same way. So investing in structures and in systems that will be sustainable, and not just for the next pandemic, but just for our day-to-day lives. It's really highlighting how unaffordable childcare is. We can't ignore this any longer. And if now is kind of a reset time that we can make investments and make changes so that things are better after, and whatever new normal it is, I'm all for that, and will say and sign whatever I need to as a parent that has to pay the cost.
Very good. That's awesome. That's great. And parents, especially moms, will not be able to go back to work under this convoluted model, and this government seriously cannot expect teachers to teach in classrooms at the same time as trying to teach the half of the class that's at home. And we can do better. I think we need a better system to invest resources, to listen to the experts, to the parents, so that we can do it better. And I think the health and safety of the students and staff is top priority, and it must be. No one should be back in school until we can be sure we are not putting kids and the staff at risk. In case if there is a second wave, those kids, it will be difficult for them to practice social distancing. And that's why their safety matters. So, and I mean, you talked about Carolina, Quebec. Is it because they have different culture than Ontario, than us? And how come our folks here in Ontario are not demanding exactly affordable, publicly run childcare?
So I think that in Quebec, they took this on back in 1997. They started, it was, a PQ government at the time. They set it out as a goal that they were going to build a childcare system for the province, and they set it out and they worked on it for years, expanding and doing that. But now, actually, even here in Canada, they're not the only province that has moved ahead on childcare. If we look at British Columbia, which is a more recent example, they had started the BC government started having a pilot program, on $10 a day childcare, and in response to the pandemic, they recently announced that they are going to accelerate bringing in $10 a day childcare in the province. So they had started on a path to build more childcare, to make it more affordable for families, and in response to the pandemic, they're going to accelerate that. So I think that we really need to be looking at how we make this into a system. We can't have just more of the same here in Ontario. I think we really do need to move forward. We also need the federal government to be making this a priority in a way that they haven't before. So I think that that's important. Just to say, for parents that want to get more involved, our organization, the Ontario Coalition for Better Childcare, we bring people together from around the province who want to advocate on childcare issues. And we've heard, recently from so many more parents that we've actually put together a new network, Ontario Childcare Parents, that we're having a meeting next Wednesday evening on Zoom. If people want to get involved, you can find information on our website, which is childcareontario.org. And because I think that parents actually are activated in a way that they haven't been before, because the crisis now in childcare is just unprecedented. So I think that there are many parents that want to be activated on this, and we want to really provide a channel for them to be able to organize together, to mobilize together, to ensure that our voices are heard, because we're all stronger together.
Very good. And so Paula, and I think I'll bring to you maybe to summarize what you feel and the frustrations and the challenges. I know we have been neglected not only the last 2 years, but the last 15 years. And we can do better. And yeah.
So again, it's just been heightened and highlighted by the COVID pandemic. Has kind of torn the roof off of an issue that, like Carolyn said, is very surprising. As a expecting parent for your first child, you don't anticipate. You're lucky if you have friends that will warn you, hey, start to get yourself on waiting lists for a place that you might not even be able to afford unless you go back to work early from your maternity leave. As I chose to do as well, because of my career that I invested many years in, and pursued a PhD and was in university for many years, while my friends kind of moved up in other industries and advancing their salaries and their careers. I've been very dependent on affordable childcare, and as well as dependent on excellent, wonderful grandparents that I'm lucky enough to have living close by and in the region as well. So just to highlight that this isn't only an issue for parents, it's also for grandparents. It's for the extended networks of people that have had to step in, and during an especially delicate time where we're worried about exposure and the spread, that we're also very committed and interested in solutions that aren't just short-term and temporary for September. That there's a systemic change that needs to happen, and yeah, thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you for joining me. NDP is calling on the Ford government to prioritize childcare and schools, the economic recovery plan, lining up more teachers, more education workers, and more classroom spaces so all students can go back to school full-time as soon as possible in September. So we have been very constructive, proposing ideas, but the question is, are they going to listen to us? I know we're almost, is that Grace Ferreira?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Could you also maybe open your video?
Yes, I'm currently, yes, here I am.
There you
Hi.
are. You have, maybe you haven't gotten the correct information. They're probably we're almost done. It's supposed to be.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
I'm in the middle of selling my house, and
okay,
they
okay.
basically asked me to vacate it. So I
Oh,
vacated
oh.
my house. So I'm so sorry I showed up
No,
late.
no worries. I will just basically introduce Grace Ferreira is a resident of York Southwestern, early childhood educator for 30 years.
Yes, that's
Years. And could you, I know that since you just joined us, I would want to give you some opportunity to share your story and a bit about the challenges that the early.
yes. Well, the challenges are that the new child care system that we are walking into is going to be a very different child care system. As we know, social distancing with young children, with preschool children, so 2.5 to 4, and I work at Campus Co-op Daycare, which is it's been around for 50 years. It's a parent collective and very hands-on with our community, and we're concerned that the formula that Doug Ford is, or that is being requested is not a financially doable formula, and I guess the issue is we're being asked to prepare to open up childcare, and we don't know if it's a financially feasible to do. We don't necessarily have the funding that's guaranteed from this particular government, and we want to open safely. There's a lot of great ideas about like forest school and trying to keep the kids outdoor, but as you know, when you have a heat wave of like such that we are in now for a week, these things become more and more complicated, and definitely childcare workers are up for the challenge, but we want to be realistic, and we want parents to understand that the face of childcare is changing, and the idea of group care is problematic at best, especially with all the information with regards to asymptomatic carriers, and there's still so much information. We don't know how this particular virus is affecting the young population, and so it seems like there's centers and childcare workers that are dragging their feet, as the Ford government may like to say, but we're trying to see if it's a doable thing, if we can do it safely, and if we can provide quality care in these sort of unprecedented times. So I guess that's our issue here, is can we keep providing the childcare that people have grown accustomed to?
Very good, very good. Well, that's great. And I know that early childhood educators need a career so that they can look after children, and also not just part-time basis, not precarious, but a career that is really a well-paying job that raises a family so that they can focus the real work, the important work of early childhood educator. I mean, you have over 30 years of experience.
Yes, yeah, it's a long time. Yeah, I've been very lucky to work for a good organization, but I guess the issue is you know, what are people prepared to pay? Like, just the way, you know, the parameters that we have to put in about how we let children in, I mean, how we let families in, all of these things are going to be curtailed and changed. And we're also working with different information. Every week things change, so we don't know if September is going to come along and they're going to change the number ratios and what that may look. But just know that the childcare workers are trying to do what they can as far as informing themselves and being prepared. But we're working with a lot of unknowns, as most people are right now.
Well, thank you. I thank you for taking the time, Grace Ferreira. I know that we have been from 7 this afternoon. It's about 8:02, and but I will start with you. Is there anything else you want to say before we sign off? Grace Ferreira.
I want to say kudos to all of the parents who've been staying home and raising their children, and I want them to, you know, keep up the good work and fight for the daycare or the childcare that they want. So being active and talking to your local MPs and signing petitions is a good way of showing the Ford government that childcare is really an essential service for everybody, as is the education. So it needs to be kind of catered to in that manner.
Thank you very much. And I know we have come to the end of our time as we have scheduled this time. I know everybody's busy for other activities. So I will just give one more time to concluding remarks for Carol and Paula.
Hi, thank you. Yes, this has been a very useful conversation. Thank you so much for facilitating this. I think that, I really echo what Grace was saying. Parents and early childhood educators are actually in this together. We need to band together and really have our voices, make our voices loud. Talk to our local representatives, call the minister and the premier, and make sure that they know that that childcare needs to be a priority for social and economic recovery.
Paula?
Yeah, just quickly as well, just a huge thank you to people like Grace that do such incredible work and take care of our children so that we're able to go back to work and provide for our families as well. And as I said early on, I'm very sympathetic to the health and safety needs, not only of course of my child, but absolutely to the people who dedicate their lives to caring for them as well. And we're 100% behind dragging feet. You can drag your feet all you want because unless you feel safe going to work, you shouldn't. And I'm 100% behind that, and in demanding more help from the government that we pay our taxes to, and the reasonable and responsible use of that funding to change a system that is right now in dire need of some help. So thank you again to Mr. Hassan for inviting me, and for someone, a parent that just signed a petition and clicked a button and having my voice heard is very satisfying. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to Carolyn Fan, Paula Dinota, and Grace Ferreira.
My apologies. My apologies.
No worries. We'll have plenty of time. Probably we'll have another time to have, because this is a big issue in our community. One time is not enough. So I thank you to all of you. Those of you who have been watching and listening and participating in the discussion and comments, I also thank you. You have been watching a virtual conversation on childcare with local community members. I thank you. Until we meet again. Thank you. And
thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.